So from an agenda point of view, we'll touch on the MeeGo overview content, and I'll maybe highlight a few things that we didn't talk about in the keynote and the panel session. Spend a bit of time and walk you through the MeeGo architecture. If you've been following MeeGo.com, we do publish architecture diagram and documentation on MeeGo.com. The version of the diagram that I'll share with you today is a bit newer, I think, than what's currently on MeeGo.com. So you'll get a bit of a sneak peek of what's coming in 1.1, some of the new things that haven't yet been published on the site but will be soon. Talk a bit about MeeGo for developers. We've got, I would say, a fairly basic SDK that we did for MeeGo 1.0. And we have a bunch of new things coming for the 1.1 SDK. We'll talk a bit about that. And then roadmap and ecosystem. And I'll maybe cover a few things in addition to what you saw on the high-level roadmap. And then wrap it up with kind of summarizing the benefits of MeeGo for people in a variety of different industries and different roles within MeeGo. I will save hopefully some time at the end for questions. So as I'm going along, if you have questions, please do raise those at the end. So we've covered this pretty thoroughly, I think, today. Hopefully you've gotten the message in terms of, what is MeeGo? MeeGo brings together MIMO and Moblin. It supports Intel architecture, it supports ARM, and it also supports a broad range of vertical categories or platforms, netbooks, handsets, tablets, media phones, connected televisions, in-vehicle infotainment. Those are the current target platforms, and it's certainly possible that we'll add more over time. I think driven by people that come and contribute to the project, as we've talked about. It's a fully open platform in terms of the technologies. It's also a fully open platform in terms of what you can do with it. One of the key aspects of MeeGo is that it brings a standard API through the MeeGo core, which we'll talk more about in the architecture diagram. That's common across all devices. So whether you're building a handset or a netbook or a TV or a car, you know that you have a certain set of APIs that as an application developer, you can count on and you can use. And you can build applications that run across devices. Of course, you can add things to the MeeGo stack, and anyone building a product would naturally do that. You can add additional open source components. You can add closed source components. From a MeeGo reference point of view, it's essential that we enable people to write closed source applications. Not everyone wants to give away their applications, of course. That's a choice you as a developer, you as a device manufacturer get to make. Do I want to do an open source application? Do I want to do closed source? So the licenses in MeeGo were chosen very carefully to make sure that for things that you need to use in your application, those licenses are chosen appropriately. So for example, Qt, being under LGPL, allows you to write, if you choose, a closed source application. You can also do an open source application. Another thing that we're doing in terms of proprietary add-ons is the way that we license the reference user experience. So you've seen the netbook experience and the handset experience. Those are licensed with Apache-style licenses generally, so that you can take them and build proprietary variations if you wish. Again, we want these to be a starting point for your development and to allow you the flexibility to contribute back open source contributions if you wish to do that, but also to do your own proprietary variation if that's something you want to do. So there is some broad license policies that are intended to support those usages that we think are important for MeeGo. I think I mentioned this a bit in the panel. In terms of the reference user experiences, these are not today being built for all of the vertical platforms that are mentioned up here. The main focus at the moment is on handset and netbook in terms of reference applications you will find at MeeGo.com. I do expect there will be others over time, but just be aware as you go and look at what's on MeeGo, you'll see different levels of reference user experience depending on the device type. We talked about MeeGo governance as well in the panel. I think the biggest thing I would say to you is if you're interested in MeeGo and how the project runs, I really would encourage you to attend one of the technical steering group meetings. This is really the place where key project decisions are discussed and debated. So that's something you can do very easily. The meetings are done using internet relay chat, so very, very easy to join. You can also, if you're interested in seeing what's happened in the past, the meeting conversation essentially is captured and archived, so that content is available for you to go take a look at. The other thing that's just getting started, as you've heard, are the working groups, which really will be, I think, an essential part of MeeGo in terms of setting the direction. So you can kind of think of the working groups in a way as the product marketing arm of MeeGo. So really driving requirements in terms of, for example, what should MeeGo handset look like in terms of its capabilities and its functions in the next version. So bringing focused requirements from the people that are contributing to MeeGo. So that's one part of the working group. And then, of course, members actually contributing content to achieve those requirements. So we're very interested, for example, if you have a strong requirement that you think, MeeGo needs to do this to be successful in the market. That's valuable input, and we really want that. What we would like even more is for you to come and say, MeeGo needs to do this to be successful in the market, and here's my contribution to get that started. So, there's value in both of those. If you can bring a requirement and bring an implementation, that's the best. And I think that is also the way, if you want to become an influential member in MeeGo over time, bringing requirements and bringing contributions is the right way to do that. Because MeeGo is, as an open source project, it's really driven by the people that contribute the most, ultimately, in terms of technology and in terms of resources. I want to talk a little bit more about MeeGo compliance. I think we touched on it a bit earlier today. This is something that's, we're in the process of building and bringing out more information on it. The focus of MeeGo compliance is application compatibility between devices. It's extremely important that we can give to the application developers a promise that if they write their application so that it's MeeGo compliant, they can be assured that it will run on any MeeGo compliant device. And there's a little subtlety there in terms of you can write an application for a specific category. So for example, you could choose to write an application to be MeeGo handset compliant, where you've really targeted it for the handset. Or you can choose to write an application that's broadly MeeGo compliant across any device. And they're very close to each other. The difference would be within each of these device categories, as we'll talk about a bit more in the architecture slide, there are some additional components that you can take advantage of. So that's a choice that the developer has. But it's a mechanism to ensure that if you write a MeeGo handset app, it'll run on any MeeGo compliant handset. Or if you write a generic MeeGo app, it'll run on any MeeGo compliant device. If we don't deliver on that promise, we'll never get scalability in the application ecosystem. Because every time you write an application, you have to validate it and maybe change it a little bit for each device. And that simply won't work. So that's really the goal of compliance. Compliance is for applications, and it's also for devices or software distributions, if you will. So you could be, for example, Novell with their SUSE Linux product. They can be MeeGo compliant on that piece of software, or somebody that constructs a device, say a handset, could be MeeGo compliant for that device. Another thing I want to mention is, although we have reference user experiences, you are not required to use those to be compliant. There is a small subset of pieces, specifically some UI framework pieces, that would be required, but not the complete experience. You can go off and do your own completely different user experience and still be MeeGo compliant. Really important to allow innovation in the user experience. So we're working on a compliance program and test suites to go along with the spec. And that will cover, as I said, applications and devices and distributions. And your ability to use the MeeGo brand will be based on passing these compliance tests. This is something that we will have in place for MeeGo 1.1, so by October. We're going to actually be discussing some of the additional details in the technical steering group in August, and you'll start to see more of this content in terms of the spec and the tools start to be released in the August timeframe as well. So very soon you'll see an additional level of detail on what this means and how it's actually going to be implemented. The overall goal, though, is to make it simple and straightforward. It will most likely be a self-certification program initially, so there won't be a large cost or investment required to do it. So we're trying to make it fairly easy to do and make it very clear what you need to do to be compliant. And I think we've touched on all the elements here in terms of open source software stack, one set of APIs. The 6-month release cadence, I think, it's very challenging for the project, but it's also one of the benefits in terms of the rapid innovation of MeeGo. Twice a year, you're going to see a new release, new kernel, a lot of new content. So we're hard at work at 1.1, and 1.2 is right on its heels, coming out in April of next year. Just summarizing what we've done so far, we launched the project, we did the netbook release in May of MeeGo 1.0. If you've been following that, you may have noticed we just did our first update a few weeks ago. So a lot of new bug fixes and updates for the MeeGo netbook stack. And then the handset day one, which is really the opening of handset development for MeeGo 1.1, happened about a month ago. So we made a lot of progress. We've only been around as a project for 6 months. So I think I'm personally pretty excited about what we've done so far. And this is really just the very beginning. If you think about the timelines for these projects. We're a very young project. I think we've made some great progress, and there's a lot more to come. Which leads us to, the MeeGo architecture. And I know there's a lot of detail on the slide, and I'm not going to talk about all of the boxes, but I'll kind of give you the overview and highlights of kind of our philosophy behind the MeeGo architecture, and then also touch on some of the key parts. We think about the MeeGo architecture in sort of maybe 2 big pieces, and this piece has 2 parts. So you heard me mention MeeGo core. That's the part that's under this dashed line here. This is the software stack that's required to be present on every MeeGo device across all the verticals. So this is the common part under the dashed line here. And within that, we divide that into what we call the OS base and the OS middleware. So those are the 2 parts of the MeeGo core. On top of the core, we have the reference user experiences. So we have netbook and handset today. And as I said, I do expect we'll see others in the future. So with that kind of broad overview, let me walk you through and talk about some of the key components at each layer. So of course, in the OS base, MeeGo is based on an upstream Linux kernel, very, very close to the upstream. I think MeeGo 1.0 went out with 2633. MeeGo 1.1 will most likely be 2635. And if you follow the Linux kernel development cycle, you can pretty much predict what kernel will be on. The Linux kernel has a very predictable cycle in terms of their major version releases. We will basically stabilize on a kernel roughly 8 to 12 weeks before the release in terms of locking down the version. So if you map out the projected kernel development cycle and overlay that on top of a yearly calendar, you could almost guess what kernel will be on in a given release. So our goal essentially is to be on the latest kernel that we can consume in the release. We want to try to be at the current version and really be as close to that upstream as we can get, and not maintain a large patch set outside of the upstream, because there's a tremendous cost as the kernel moves forward if you have a bunch of patches that aren't upstream in maintaining those patches. And you also don't get the advantage of all the innovation that's happening upstream. Of course, in the OS base beyond the kernel, we have all the core system libraries. We are based on glibc. dbus, which is kind of a core message bus for inter-process communication, if you will, and then some other components there as well. So that's the OS base, basically kernel and key system libraries. One of the things that goes along with that is this thing we call hardware adaptation software. This is all the device drivers, for example, that you need to make MeeGo run on a given platform. There are also, if you notice, there's a little gray bar that kind of slides up the side here. That really is to indicate that the hardware adaptation isn't just about device drivers or architecture support in the kernel. There are also other places where you have hardware adaptation. For example, in the media framework, you may have hardware accelerated codecs. It's a good example of hardware adaptation. Or in the graphics, the visual services stack, you may have hardware accelerated video encode and decode. And those are hardware specific, of course. So that's really what this is meant to indicate. This is a set of software that you need in order to run MeeGo on a given architecture and on a given specific platform. And the goal with MeeGo, of course, is to get all of that software integrated into MeeGo. We want all of our device drivers to be in the upstream kernel. We want any other changes that are affecting the middleware to be in line with upstream, because that really reduces the amount of work that we have to do to maintain that software over time. Anytime we have a driver that's not in the upstream, it's a tremendous amount of effort to keep that maintained. Anytime we have a driver that's closed source, it's 10 times harder. Licensing issues aside, dealing with closed source drivers is tremendously painful from a project point of view. So if you're looking at a MeeGo platform, you really want to look for open source upstream drivers. That's a goal that we really are shooting for. So that's the hardware adaptation. Then in the core of the middleware, we have a set of services for different areas. So communications, internet services, visual services, so 2D, 3D graphics, the media services for audio and video streaming and playback and encoding, core data management for things like contacts and calendar data, device services, so these are a bunch of the things that you need to build a mobile device, like the sensor framework, for example, or device health, which looks after things like battery charging, and personal services, which include things like device sync. A couple other things I'll point out here, kind of new projects that you may have heard about in the panel. Ophono, this is the telephony framework for doing 3G voice and data. Conman is the connection management for managing Wi-Fi, Ethernet, WiMAX, and 3G data connections as well. So these are kind of key new projects that you see within MeeGo. Many of the other things in here, these are pulled from upstream, so there should be a lot of familiar names in there. Above the middleware services layer, we have what we call the MeeGo APIs. And of course, there are a lot of APIs down here, but then there are also some APIs that are special. And they're special in the sense that we're going to make a compatibility promise and say that if you write your application using these MeeGo APIs, you can be assured that it will run on the next version of MeeGo for some fairly long period of time, maybe a couple of years. It's not forever, of course, but it's binary compatibility for multiple releases. So those are the MeeGo APIs. As compared to these platform APIs, you can use those in a MeeGo compliant application, but they may change from version to version. So there's more of a burden if you're using those. In the current MeeGo, we have the MeeGo 1.0, we have Qt. It's actually Qt 4.6 in MeeGo 1.0. This is kind of reflecting more where we're going with MeeGo 1.1, where we're going to bring in also the MeeGo web runtime. And I'll talk a little bit more in the next slide about a couple of other APIs that are new and coming in. And then last comment on this slide is, as I mentioned in compliance, for each of the verticals, there are some specific UI frameworks, there can be, that are unique to that vertical. So for example, Netbook has a specific UI framework. Handset uses the MeeGo Touch framework. So those are additional components that are layered on top of the core, but they are required for MeeGo compliance for that device category. So if you're building a MeeGo handset, you would need to include the MeeGo Touch framework. You don't need to include the rest of this. The rest of this is referenced, but you need to include that specific component. So when we release the MeeGo compliance spec, we'll describe those specific components. So there'll be a core section that will talk about compliance with the MeeGo core, and then there will be vertical specific chapters, so a handset chapter, a netbook chapter, and so on, that will talk about requirements that are specific to that device category. So that's how that will be done. Just a little bit more on the reference user experience, because I think this is an area that there's been a lot of innovation going on around the user experience. And there's some common themes that you'll see if you've looked at the netbook user experience and the handset user experience that come out, some commonality. One of them is around this integrated and personalized social networking. So building social networking into the core user experience, really exposing, what are my friends doing on Facebook or Twitter or whatever your favorite social network might be, exposing that directly in the user interface. You see it in the netbook with this kind of social networking feed, and that theme also comes across in the handset user experience. It's bringing the social networking directly into the UI. Of course, full internet experience, rich media consumption, based on standards. That's a core theme that you'll see across these reference user experiences. And then finally, really important is being customizable. Taking these references as a starting point and being able to customize them and brand them to however you want on your own device. So very important that we make these usable as a starting point for people building products. They're not an end in their own. And of course, we're also using a lot of animation. If you've seen any of these in action, we're trying to make them very dynamic, very visual, using 3D accelerated graphics, which is available, across the MeeGo platforms via OpenGL. So I want to talk now a little bit more about what's available if you're an application developer and you want to develop on MeeGo. This is the place that you should start in terms of MeeGo.com for more information on developing applications. It's just MeeGo.com/developers. You'll find a lot of information about the MeeGo architecture and more details on the API, how you can get started. You can also download the SDK from this webpage. In terms of the APIs, I mentioned there's some new things coming in 1.1, so a little more detail on that. We will, of course, have the core Qt library. It's version 4.7 is what we're targeting for MeeGo 1.1, which is kind of the latest and greatest core Qt stack. MeeGo Touch Framework, which is what's being used in the handset. This is the touch optimized. You can think of it as a layer on top of Qt with touch optimized widget set and support for multi-touch and so on. So this is a complementary set of technology to the core Qt library set. The MeeGo Web Runtime, which is for sort of rapid web-style application development, so sort of widget-style apps. You can develop those using common web development tools and then run them in this web runtime, which is based on WebKit. Supports HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, of course, as the core development languages. And that's something that will be in place for MeeGo 1.1 as well. So you have Qt for native application development, and then the web runtime for web-style runtime app development. And then finally, we have also some new APIs collectively called Qt Mobility. And this is an API set that gives you access to some of the things you need on a device. So for example, access to the common contacts database, access to location information, access to connection management. So this is an evolving set of APIs. So we'll have an initial set of APIs that will come into 1.1, and that will continue to grow over time. So there'll be more and more of these mobility-style APIs that will be added to the MeeGo API set and allow you really to do more and more of your programming within Qt itself. In terms of the SDK, there's also a lot of new things coming to the SDK. We've got, if you look at the development cycle or the app life cycle from develop, debug, package, and distribute, you'll be able to do application development on both Linux and on Windows. And that will also include the ability to run your application in a virtual machine environment. So you can actually run the MeeGo stack and then run your application on top of that inside of a virtual machine. So if you don't have access to a device, that allows you to test your application in a real device environment. This also does support OpenGL acceleration. As I mentioned, our user experiences do take a lot of advantage of 3D acceleration in the user experience. So this was an important feature to allow you to get good performance when you're running the device stack on a workstation. So that's something that's new and coming in the 1.1 version. In addition to that, we've also added, this is new as well, packaging support. So obviously as you're doing your application, you're going to develop it, you're going to debug it, and then you need to package it in the right format so it can go into application stores. So these tools will help you to package your application into an RPM package. RPM is the packaging technology used in MeeGo. So we've got some tools there, and those will integrate into Qt Creator. Qt Creator, if you're not familiar, is the core IDE for developing Qt applications. And we've got all of these tools really are plugging into that Qt Creator environment. And then lastly, we have the ability to do application publishing, also as a plug-in to Qt Creator. I think initially it's probably going to go to this community repository, which is essentially, if you're doing an open source app, you can publish it directly into this community repository. And over time, we will also add the ability to publish into various app stores. So it's sort of a one-click, I want to make my application available in the OV store or in the app store. Just push a button and you'll be able to publish it via the development tool. So a lot of new things coming in the 1.1 SDK, and this will be released along with the 1.1 release in October. So all of these things are under active development. If you're interested in getting involved, there are, this is all being done in the open, so you can certainly get involved in the development as well. This was covered as well, I think, by Jim in terms of the flow of code. So I'll maybe just make a couple of comments on how this flow works. If you look at the left-hand side of this page, this is kind of the MeeGo project right here. This is what we're doing in MeeGo. We're pulling from open source projects. We're pulling from things that are unique to MeeGo, and we're creating this MeeGo distribution. And we're producing reference images, and we're producing builds of MeeGo. The right-hand side of this is sort of the consumption side of MeeGo. So if you're someone that wants to build a MeeGo device, you go to MeeGo.com, you can grab the MeeGo stack, you can add to that additional components like codecs and closed source components. And that can be done either by an operating system vendor, say Novell, for example, or with River, or it could be done directly by the device manufacturer. So you really have the flexibility to do that either way. And then finally, to integrate that and create a final device. So that's kind of the basic flow of creating MeeGo on this side, consuming MeeGo on that side. And of course, there's kind of a feedback loop that's not shown here, but people that are consuming are also typically contributing. So both Intel and Nokia were consuming and contributing at the same time, which is, I think, the ideal situation. We want people to be both consuming and contributing if possible. So the roadmap, again, we have our 6-month cadence, next release being 1.1, coming in October. Specifically adding support for handset, tablet, and media phone. We have this running on a couple of media phone platforms. You may not have noticed, but there is a 1.0 IBI release. So this is basically supporting MeeGo on some specific IBI platforms. And that will carry forward. And then in 1.2, we expect to add support for connected television as well. One other comment on the roadmap. If you're interested in, we have the 6-month cycle. Obviously that breaks down into some time spent thinking about requirements, and then a period of active feature development, and then a stabilization period, and then there's kind of the release phase. If you go to the MeeGo wiki, you can go to MeeGo.com and you can find the wiki link there. There's a bunch more detail on exactly how we do release engineering and what that cycle looks like. We have a weekly build cadence. So you can find a lot of information on the MeeGo site about how exactly we're building MeeGo. So if you're somebody that's looking at building a product around MeeGo, encourage you to go take a look at that, because it'll give you a lot more insight into how are things actually built and where can I find more information on current bugs and all of that information. It's all available on MeeGo.com. I want to just give you a quick look at the Intel platform roadmap. We've talked a lot about MeeGo, and obviously at Intel we're also building a variety of Atom-based platforms that MeeGo will run great on top of. So I've just got a couple of roadmap slides. This first slide is showing the Atom roadmap targeting primarily netbooks and smartphones and handhelds. So the top row here, this is the netbook platforms. So we have Diamondville, which was essentially last year's netbook platform, and Pine Trail, which is the current generation of netbook platform. MeeGo netbook release, of course, runs great on both of those. So that's what we do a lot of our internal development on. And then on the handset side, we've got current generation, which is Morristown. If you saw out in the demo showcase the AVA mobile device running the handset day 1 image, that is based on the Morristown platform. Dramatically lower power if you compare it to previous generation Menlo, which was targeting sort of the tablet space. So 50x reduction in the idle power there. And then we're hard at work on the next generation of platform for the handheld space, which is called Medfield. And you can expect that trend of continuing to reduce the overall platform power and continuing to focus on performance to carry forward with Medfield. So of course, within Intel, our goal is to make sure that MeeGo runs great on these Intel platforms. We do a lot of work on getting the drivers for these platforms upstream and making sure they're good quality. And we do a lot of optimization and work around that in our role as Intel. And then one more roadmap slide, just looking at platforms coming for connected TV. We do have an Atom-based system on a chip currently shipping for the connected TV market. And we have the second generation system on a chip codenamed Groveland that will be coming out later on this year. And again, we're working on making sure that MeeGo runs well on that platform as well. So encourage you to check those out. We can certainly get you more information on these platforms. So if you're interested in that, just come and see me afterwards. Okay, so just to summarize quickly, and I want to leave a few minutes for questions. If you look at MeeGo, there really is value there for everyone in the ecosystem. I think there's a great opportunity if you're an open source developer to come and contribute to a really cutting edge project, become recognized as a key contributor. If you're an application developer, the ability to write your application once and scale it across not only multiple devices, but also multiple stores. I think there's going to be tremendous value as these devices and stores start coming to market over the next year or so. For device manufacturers, the technologies, the openness will, I think, bring tremendous value. You're going to start seeing the first MeeGo products coming on market. You heard from Nokia, they have a device plan for this year. The flexibility in terms of supporting multiple architectures and multiple device types, and also the ability to really participate in driving the project. If you're an operator or a service provider, I think there's a great opportunity to bring a unique device to market and to do your own services, do your own app store, all branded under your own brand if you wish. So tremendous flexibility in how you bring devices to market and also bring your own unique services onto those devices. And then finally, I think MeeGo also will benefit the overall Linux platform. You heard Jim talk about that. As we work and contribute back to upstream projects across a wide range of technologies, it really is going to move the Linux platform forward, which will benefit really everyone, not just MeeGo. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I think we have a few minutes for questions if there are any.